Hello, and welcome to the StepStories podcast. I'm your host, Robin Breuner. And today I am talking to a guest who is a family law attorney, and she is also a very old friend of mine. She's not very old, but we are old friends going back to early childhood. Welcome, Susan Galamba. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Yes, we
Uh,
are not old.
no, we're not old. But Susan and her husband and I have known each other since we were little children, actually. We basically grew up together, and they live in Kansas City, which is where I am from originally, and also spent a few adult years there. And Susan and I had a lot of fun in those years. And I asked Susan to be on the show because she's a very successful and longtime family law attorney, and she's got a lot of experience working with blended families, and she's seen what's worked and what hasn't. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation about that. I would like to read her bio because she's got a lot of wonderful accolades, and just so you know a little bit about her today. So I'm going to read it. Susan Galamba is a highly respected family law attorney with extensive experience in complex family law cases across Kansas and Missouri. Known for her strategic advocacy and deep legal insight, she represents clients in high net worth dissolutions, intricate property division, business valuations, child custody disputes, and other challenging matters. Her practice is grounded in integrity, compassion, and a commitment to achieving the best outcomes for her clients. She is also the published author of Don't Burn the Underwear, which I ordered and was hoping to have it here to show, but I don't. So maybe you could talk about how you came up with that title. And she is a frequent lecturer on family law topics and the former host of the talk radio show Till Divorce Do Us Part. So, Susan, that's a lot. First of all, how'd you come up with Don't Burn the Underwear?
So I had a client who the spouse had an affair, and I get a phone call one day, and I'm told that, and it was the wife who had had the affair, and the husband had burned all of her underwear on the barbecue grill, and so and then he felt really bad, so he went out to Victoria's Secret and bought her all brand new underwear, and I told him that that was really stupid, and, um, so then he was like, "Why?" And I said, "Because you've just bought the new underwear for the new boyfriend."
That's awesome.
Like I said, people don't always think about their actions and and the aftermath. The aftermath in this case,
And
the new boyfriend was really happy with him I'm sure.
that's literally a heat of the moment situation.
Literally, he's the that's very
Literally.
good. That was good. It had some fire in it.
Yes, it did. So, yeah, let's talk about you and about some of the things you help people with. I know that, we know blended families come in all different forms, and it can be two families coming together with kids like the Brady Bunch, or people coming as widowers, or when one person has kids and the other one doesn't, two families coming together and then having their own kids. So I'd just love to start hearing from you, and we can go topic by topic about what you think.
Okay. So, like you said, there are all forms, of blended families. What I end up saying is either, somebody who's going into a blended family, and it can be that both parties end up having, children, the minor children, older children, and everybody has to get acquainted and get along whether they get along or not. I know you've seen, just because the parents get married, it doesn't mean that the kids get along. And a lot of times people think that there may be, especially if the children are older, that there may be ulterior motives as to why the parties are getting together. and there's a lot of dynamics that have to be addressed, and sometimes they're addressed well, and sometimes they're not addressed very well. The so when you have, for example, if you made the comment about, um, there may be one party who has children, and then the soon-to-be spouse doesn't have any children. So you may end up having dynamics that the spouse who doesn't have any children actually ended up trying to parent the stepchildren, which can be a real problem.
Mhm.
Biological parent doesn't want the step parent to parent the children. And there can
The
be a
biological parent from the divorce.
from the
The
divorce, right?
yes. Mhm.
They don't want the step parent to parent the children, and that can cause issues, and then they have to deal with, what's off limits, what can they do? Are they walking on eggshells? So, and then and especially if the new spouse has never had children, that can be a problem. So, yeah, so that's what you have, when you have, you know, oftentimes when people end up getting remarried, uh, they're in love, they're thinking how great this is gonna be, and they don't necessarily think about the dynamics. What happens if they're getting married and they both have children that are the same age and go to the same school? Do they wanna acknowledge each other in the hallway or at lunch,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And so having to handle that can be a real problem.
Yeah.
You
How do
said
you
you said
so do you, legally, is that something that you put in when a divorce is happening or when a new family's being set up? Is that something that you handle?
so when parties are getting divorced, they can include in their settlement agreement terms in relation to what's going to happen when and if the other spouse becomes involved with a significant other, or if they get married. They can, runs the gamut. And one, it may not be in there because maybe the parents get along so well and it's not an issue. It can have you can have provisions where the um, the soon-to-be spouse or the significant other uh, isn't allowed to drive the children to school, or if there's a first right of refusal, meaning if the actual spouse can't be with the children, then the other biological parent gets to have the children with them before the new spouse does.
Oh, okay. So where you come in with this is you create the language and the legality. So this is clear beforehand so that it doesn't get messy after a divorce. Is that right? Am I clarifying that right?
Well, it doesn't get messy. So that's why I'm laughing, right? Because it can always get messy. And
Well, yes.
because you put it in a parenting plan, every state, every county, every judge is different, but in different states, reference, for example, a parenting plan. Some states may not call it a parenting plan, they may call it something else. But but what it is it's the document that addresses the custody and the parenting time or the visitation that the parents are going to have. And then it has other terms as far as whether or not they have, for example, joint legal custody, which means they both have the same input into the raising, education, health care, well-being of the children. So, um, my job, if the case is settled, is to help the parties come to an agreement on what terms are important, and are they going to look at what happens, you know, when each party may get involved with a significant other
Mhm.
or get remarried. Not all parenting plans have that. If you have a couple, a young couple that is getting divorced with young children, it's a good idea to discuss that. And it depends on what's going on in the dynamics of the divorce, um, as to how much you have to discuss.
And so, if I'm understanding correctly, what you're talking about is do this during and with the divorce and with the final agreement before you go out and you potentially meet somebody else. Make sure you've got something in place um for these some of these issues. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. Especially, like I said, especially if you have small children, and maybe even if you have older children, but definitely if you have small children. If you can agree what you're going to do, in the event that either of you become involved with somebody else, how are you going to handle a step parent reprimanding a child,
Mhm.
right? Is there there's sometimes they'll say, there's no spanking. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Um, as far as who talks to the teacher, are they welcome to talk to the teacher or not? Um, if again, like I said before, if the other parent isn't able to be with the children, do they then get to go to um, the parent who hasn't remarried? You
So
know,
another you're saying if one parent is away for a while or something like that, instead of this potential step parent being the one who is taking them, it's you have language that says they actually then go with the other biological parent instead.
right? So let me give you a stereotypical example.
Yeah.
Right, you have a stay-at-home mom. She's always stay at home. She's always taking care of the kids. Um, Parties get divorced. Dad's been the one who was the breadwinner. He works really hard. He works a lot, but he ends up in the divorce with 50% parenting time or close to 50% parenting time. And then dad gets remarried and his wife is stay at home. So he says, okay, I have 50% of the time. I'm never there, but the kids get to stay with my new wife.
Hmm.
So, if you can handle situations like that before they occur or try to, that's great. Here's the issue, it's always going to be modifiable. You're dealing with the custody of the children. So, if there's an issue, if the framework that you've set up at the time of the divorce doesn't work, 2 years later or 3 years later, you can go back and you can ask the court to modify the parenting plan, which is why I kind of chuckled when you said so that it doesn't get messy. Because, you know, look, two parties are getting divorced because they weren't getting along.
Right.
Now you bring into the mix a third person. That
Or
third
fourth.
person or
Right.
person, right?
Yeah.
They may not get along, or maybe they get along with some of them, or you know, it can be pretty tricky.
Well, I know. I know about that. So, let's talk about some of the other things also. I know there's alimony, child support, uh things like existing debt that has to be managed. What do you see as far as managing those sorts of things, and also prenuptial, postnuptial agreements, those sorts of things?
So I think the overriding um, issue that somebody needs to think about if they're going to go into a relationship with someone who has children, whether they have children or not, is, what is your financial situation? What obligations do you want to be responsible or not be responsible for? So, for example, um, if uh, the wife is going to marry the husband, is going to marry is going to get the new spouse, and the new spouse owes child support and maintenance or alimony, is the new wife going to pay that? Who's gonna pay that? And so whether that it's by agreement, whether it's a prenuptial agreement, um, that every case is gonna be a little bit different, but, it's certainly something that needs to be discussed. If
Mhm.
somebody comes into the marriage and they have a significant amount of debt and the other person doesn't, how's that debt gonna be handled? And that can end up impacting, the children as well, because what can happen is, uh, 2 parties can agree to get divorced and do it very amicably. And let's say one party is very generous in the maintenance and the child support, award, and then that spouse gets remarried, and the new spouse isn't so happy with this really nice maintenance and child support
Mhm.
award because it's taking away from the money that the new spouse gets to spend,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
That can be a dynamic that people don't really think about before they get married, and then it becomes an issue. And, you know, the new spouse is going to have a lot of weight. And so you may end up having a modification issue come up.
Mhm.
And it can end up, impacting the children as well, because anytime you have conflict, it's gonna, impact the kids.
Well, and that's making me think too about, estate planning and wills and all of that, and I know you're not an estate planning attorney, but yes, what happens when a biological parent dies, you definitely need to have that set up for what happens to their assets, when you've got a blended family. Does it go to
Now that
the
you
biological children? Does it go to the new spouse? Well, not new, but the spouse, um, and that spouse's kids? All those things are important to know in advance and not just leave that because when you die, you could leave. Back to my favorite word, a very messy situation.
a very messy situation. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. And the it's gonna be if somebody dies, it's gonna be how does that impact the children and the new spouse? If the parent who passed away, um, has assets and there's stepchildren, it's not really gonna impact the stepchildren unless there's been some kind of a will or a trust established,
Mhm.
and they've actually named them as beneficiaries, but generally, it's just gonna be the children, and the new spouse. You also have what happens with respect to the custody and the parenting time. And the custody is going to revert to the other parent as far as, I mean, they're going to end up having sole custody. But what if this step parent raised the children
Mhm.
and they have a really close bond? Um, the step parent may end up asking for time with the children for third
Mhm.
party custody or third party parenting time.
And what happens, um, if in the case of a death where a parent has died and then the existing parent gets remarried and then that parent potentially dies? What happens to with
This
I'm
this
thinking
is
of
a
the worst
weird
case
thing.
scenarios, of course,
Right,
but,
everybody's dying on Robin's show.
no, 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 no. But, no, but I'm just thinking about I'm thinking about the poor kids. What happens to the kids if it's the step parent that's left? What how does that work legally? Like, you have to have
More than
something in
likely,
place.
there's gonna be a will and there's gonna be a custodian named.
Okay, right, right,
Yeah,
right, right, right.
more than likely, that's what's gonna happen.
Right.
I will
That's
tell
right.
you, if everybody dies, there's no child support and there's no maintenance.
I know. Okay. I'm just thinking if it's the step parent that's left standing. What if the step
Right,
parent? Well, yeah, I guess you would have a will because you have those guardianship issues and yes.
right. I mean, what happens if the step-parent says, "I don't want these kids?"
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, then yeah, if the step-parent, then you start looking at the family members, and there's guardianship, and depends on the age of the children, and, um, yeah, that would not be a pretty situation. Fortunately, hopefully you haven't jinxed me. Fortunately, I have not come across that issue.
Okay. No, I hope I haven't jinxed you either. But I think that I know you and I have just talked in general about life. And sometimes that happens. I mean, sometimes you've got grown stepchildren, dealing with a step parent coming in, maybe, I guess, are there any obligations for the children of a step parent for the grown children to take care of that step parent? If they're I don't know, if they're not adopted by them or whatever. They're not legally their children.
Well, there's not any obligation for a biological child to take care of their biological parent. I mean, how many times have you seen that there are people who do not take care of their parents?
This is true. This is very true.
So,
Um, what about what's going on? Another subject is what about half siblings? What happens when the couple, blends a family, they both bring in children, and then they have children of their own, and then there's a divorce. Uh, have you encountered that?
yes, and so what ends up happening is, um, the biological children of the husband and wife, I'm gonna say they got remarried, right? So the biological children, um, will be part of the divorce action. That's where the custody, when they talk about custody and parenting time, they'll be part of that divorce action. But the step-parent, the stepchildren, um, may they could be part of the divorce, but generally speaking, they won't, right? So let's say, um, the let's give 'em names. Ann and Steve, right, are the couple that get remarried, and Ann and Steve have 2 children. And Anne has 2 children, we'll make it the Brady Bunch because 'cause we'll make it 6. So, Anne has 2 children from a previous marriage, and Steve has 2 children from a previous marriage, right? The Assuming that Anne and Steve have ex-spouses that have parenting time and are involved with the kids, they're not generally gonna be subjects of Anne and Steve's divorce action, right? Their
Mhm.
biological children will be, but not the stepchildren. The way
Mhm.
stepchildren can come into play is, um, again, if the biological children have a really strong relationship have a really strong relationship with the stepbrothers and sisters.
Mhm.
It's always you always look at what's in the best interest of the children.
Mhm.
And so the courts are gonna wanna maintain, strong relationships, whether it's a biological or as a stepchild or not. So there can be the parenting time and how much time do they get to see, the children could their step brothers and sisters could be a factor that comes into play. A lot of times you'll end up seeing um, when people get remarried and have children from a previous marriage and then have children from the new marriage, um, they get divorced, right?
Mm.
So the Ann and Steve situation, they want to have all the kids on the same weekend because they want to have weekends off. So when they have alternating weekends, they're now negotiating with two spouses to have all the kids.
Yeah. So is that something, I guess, for somebody listening who might be in that street or getting into a situation where they know they'd like to have more kids in that sense, bringing kids in, like, I know you're not giving legal advice on this podcast, but what might you suggest? How would they set that up in advance?
You mean if they remarry and they wanna have children?
Yeah, and they're bringing children in.
And they're bringing children in. Well, the reality is that it depends on the relationship with the ex-spouse,
Mm,
and the children, and, it's just I think it's like any situation, one, you have to have communication,
yeah.
not only with the ex-spouse and the kids, but obviously the current spouse, and what is it gonna look like, and how are we gonna handle this? Because if the new marriage is if they're gonna have children, those children are gonna be with them 24/7, right? It's just gonna be the step siblings that are coming.
Mm,
And so obviously you need the step siblings to feel as important as, these new babies or, the new brother and sister. It's really more of a psychologist question.
yeah, I know. I was thinking I actually am getting ready to have a couple of experts in this field on, which I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to. So I know it. You're right. It's more for them because I what came to mind for me is I have some friends and they got married, and the wife had a child from a previous marriage. The husband did not, and then they ended up having a couple of other kids. But I know it was, challenging for the existing child, to have to, go spend time with her father and leave her, 2 sisters that's the kind of stuff that has to be handled well with communication, I know. But anyway, you're right. That's more for, a therapist, not a lawyer.
No, it is, and that's where you can end up having all kinds of problems though, right?
Mhm.
Then so if it's the mother who gets remarried and has 2 children and had 1 child from the previous marriage, and the child from the previous marriage has bonded with the new siblings and says, "No, I don't wanna go see dad. I don't wanna spend
Mm.
time with dad." That's where mom and ex-husband really need to work together so that the child, feels loved at home, knows it's okay to go to dad's. You come back and be with, the siblings. You get some alone time with dad, which is a good thing. So I'll be interested to hear what the psychologists have to say.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Right.
Well, I'm a couple of things, just what I'm curious, what are some of the most common and challenging issues? Well, those are actually 2 separate things, common and challenging
Yeah.
things that you've had to deal with, but on each of those levels.
So I think when you have young couples getting divorced that have children, it is very common that they are going to get remarried or at least be in a relationship where they're living with someone else. And the children are going to be exposed to a new either step parent or, the significant other of their parent. And so that's just really common. You also
Mm,
have situations, where older children, the parents get divorced, and then they get remarried. And there's all kinds of issues with that because parents when parents get parents of older children are divorced and get remarried, the parent doesn't necessarily care so much
Mhm.
whether or not the kids get along with this new spouse. Not
Right.
like you do when you're little. That's my observation. Yes,
Yeah.
they care. Yes, it's important. Uh, but it's different because you're not talking about having to live with the children and the step parent all the time. So it's kind of a different dynamic. And then the kids are concerned, is this person taking advantage of my mother, my father?
Mm.
What's the real incentive? I mean, you're shaking your head, yes. So because you're familiar with the fact that when a parent gets remarried, it's it's this new person coming in your life, and you're not the one who picked that person.
Well, and I'm also I'm shaking my head yes, not from my own experience as much as I'm thinking about. I hope this is okay if I'm talking about something personal that I don't know. It's my husband's family, but I think it can get really tricky when you have a marriage when the parents are older and there are grown kids. My mother-in-law recently passed away about a year and a half ago, and there was some tricky stuff because some decisions had to be made, and her grown adult children were named as the, well, I don't know what you call it now, the people who make the medical decisions.
They had the power of attorney.
Yeah, and then, she had a husband, and, he felt, "I'm the husband, I should be making decisions," and it got very, emotional and difficult when those really difficult decisions needed to be made. And I know that's part of, the medical. I'm so not legal, but all the DNR, whatever you're supposed to have, just, you need to
Right.
make sure that stuff's in place because this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Most of the subjects on my podcast here are blended families, talking about younger families. But boy, it gets complicated when there is a blended family when you're older.
And financially as well.
Mhm.
Because you can have power of attorneys for healthcare decisions and then financial decisions. But
Mhm.
the power of attorneys, um, are terminate when somebody passes away, then you're gonna have a will or you're gonna have a trust.
Right.
But it's when somebody's incapacitated or unable to make the decisions, and they need somebody else to make those decisions. It's
So I
hard.
think it's Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I'm just thinking about it those when your parents get married at that point, and you are a grown adult or vice versa, speaking to a parent of grown adults getting married, you need to make sure legally you have all that figured out, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, my mother passed away almost 23 years ago. My father remarried. Fortunately, we all get along. And I love her, and we've been able to work through those things. But everyone is not so fortunate.
Mm,
There,
that's
it
right.
can be really, really difficult.
Mm,
I would say, the most important thing is when I think if you have two people who are getting divorced and they have small children, they do need to think about what happens when this third or fourth individual comes into the family, right? Because who it is, how you communicate, you know, how they treat your children
mhm.
going is going to be very impactful. And don't kid yourself. Children are gonna go to the parent who says yes, you know? And so you just you have to talk about it, and this is, whether you get divorced or you don't get divorced, because children are gonna go to the parent who says yes.
Mm.
I was not that parent.
I kinda was, I think. But, well, I'm curious because you do hear a lot that second marriages have a tough time a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I'm curious in your business, how often you work with people who are getting divorced out of a first marriage and then come back to you after a second marriage. Is that very common?
It's pretty common. It
Mm,
Yeah. So, a lot of times people will jump into a second marriage without really thinking about the ramifications of it, and that's where, they let their emotions, get ahead of them, and they stop using their brain.
mm,
So, and sometimes they can find counseling either through therapists or through lawyers to help them see the light, but not always. And then it's not unusual for people to regret not doing something when it's too late. Um, you know, but yeah, it's not unusual. It's like I said, especially for younger couples, but really, I mean, any couples. In this day and age, I mean, there are people that are getting remarried in their 80s.
yeah. Well, I'm just curious. Do you ever see? I'm sure not ever is a strong word, but sometimes see people get divorced, get remarried, get divorced, and go back to their first original spouses. Have you handled much of that?
So I haven't actually handled a case like that, but I've seen it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then
I'm
and
just curious.
I didn't represent Liz Taylor, but it's Taylor Horton.
Too bad for you.
Right, too bad for me. She never lived in Kansas City. Oh, and it was
Uh, she was a little bit older than you too.
just a little.
But just curious, one last question I have for you. What made you go this route for a career? Just curious, since you have, I know, a wonderful long-term marriage.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I know your parents were married, also had a wonderful marriage. So what pushed you in this direction?
So I really just fell into it,
Mm,
and one of the partners of the firm I was working at had me start working on some divorce cases, and I did well, and I felt like I was helping people, and, I don't know, I guess some days I'm fortunate, sometimes I'm not, like anybody who works, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, but, you know, helping people um, is very nice because it's a very difficult time, and people all the time feel like they're failures, because they're getting divorced and they're not. You have friendships, right? The friendships that you have long-term friendships and they don't work out. And people don't think that they're failures because their friendship didn't work out. And people change, things happen. You're not a failure. It's just, a time in life. And it changes.
Well, and I think also that I don't think you're a failure if you can. There goes Luna, my dog. All right, maybe we're going to end here. I was just going to say, staying in a marriage that's unhappy, some people might call that a failure for not having the strength to get out of it. So I don't know. I don't think you can ever judge anything because I always say nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors in any relationship. That is for sure.
That is for sure.
Yeah,
100%.
100%. But I want to thank you so much for doing this. I know how very busy you are. Unfortunately, you're very, very busy, but I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you, and I hope that some of the listeners, lots of listeners, got some great information and suggestions out of this.
Well, I love you. I think you're doing a great job, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks.